This was a team that you said was going to be horrible, and they were anything but. The Houston Texans under first-year head coach DeMeco Ryans and rookie quarterback C.J. Stroud. They were good. They were really good this season. And I'm looking at their division, right? So we thought last year when we looked at the Jaguars, oh, the Jaguars, this is just going to be their division to lose on a year in, year out basis. But now I'm starting to have questions. Now I'm starting to have questions, in particular, their quarterback. But you know what? I think C.J. Stroud is a star, and I think C.J. Stroud has eclipsed Trevor Lawrence as the best quarterback in the AFC South, and I don't think that's an over-exaggeration. Kind of like when we look at this Houston Texans team, they took some chances, they took some risks. Trading up for Will Anderson last year was a big risk to get 2 picks in the top 5, but all things hit for them. The biggest question I have for them at this point is what happens with Bobby Slowik, and can they replace him if he moves forward? What about you?
I mean, that's the biggest question at this point for the Texans, right? Is what's going to happen with Bobby Slowik, and do they get a second year to kind of run this thing back with the same core of their team? That's the biggest short-term question mark. They can do some interesting things with the roster because they do have a lot of cap space available at their disposal. So we'll see what they do with the roster itself. They have some interesting choices there. First and foremost, I would just like to congratulate the Texans on proving that consequences don't matter. There's no consequences for bad behavior in the NFL. Houston Texans, they ran that organization into ground. They hired a youth pastor to be their president of football operations, despite the fact he was not qualified to be a president of football operations. He just liked to pray with the owner a lot. And so they gave him the position, and he ran the organization into the ground, funded 3 different NFL teams' most successful runs of the last 15 years. When you talk about Cleveland, Miami, and Arizona, gave Miami all those draft picks for Tunsil, gave Arizona DeAndre Hopkins and J.J. Watt for free. We know what happened with Cleveland. Like, just congratulations on running your organization into the ground, going through 4 head coaches in 3 years, and just proving that consequences don't matter. Because then you got the best coaching candidate to hit the market in the last 3 years in DeMeco Ryans, who chose them over the Denver Broncos. Remember, the Broncos wanted DeMeco Ryans. Sean Payton was their B option for head coach, and DeMeco took the Texans job over the Broncos job.
Yeah.
And
can we add just the context that you took the Texans job because they had a better draft position, which obviously turned into C.J. Stroud. You weren't locked in with Russell Wilson, and he played for the Houston Texans.
That's the one. He played there for the Texans.
So there's at least multiple variables there that made that a more desirable job.
Yes. Took that job when he could have had any of the openings in the NFL. And honestly, I understand him taking that job over the Panthers in hindsight, the Colts, the Cardinals. Makes sense. It wasn't a very good hiring cycle for teams last year, but got that, nailed the quarterback who had, I mean, people were bringing this up, and I think there's a case to be made, had the greatest rookie season of any quarterback ever. Because Patrick Mahomes' MVP season was technically his second year, but first as a starter. Like, jumping into the league and going, like, CJ Stroud was a top 4 quarterback in the NFL this year. I mean, there is a little bit of a dispute between 4 and 5, depending on how you feel about one Dakota Prescott's season. But I mean, he was legitimately one of the 4 best quarterbacks in the NFL right off the bat. And that's something that I don't think Trevor Lawrence, as good as Trevor Lawrence has been, I don't think he's ever been a top 4 quarterback in the NFL during any of his 3 seasons in the NFL.
No, at this point, I'm itching to say that Trevor Lawrence is closer to 15 than he is to 5, like in terms of actually his output over the last couple of years. And it's starting to get to the point where it's harder to make excuses for Trevor Lawrence in terms of, he had the Urban Meyer thing, we're getting distance from that. We started to expect to see more, like, especially when, again, you have Stroud in his own division coming in and taking his lunch money, and yeah. There is a mission of someone who deserves a real shout out as we talk the Houston Texans and their success this season. How about it for Lovie Smith, right? Lovie Smith, the real MVP, getting them out of that one spot. Little did they know that would force them into making the right decision in the end.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that moment is going to be just magical, just amazing. Again, no consequences for your actions, Houston Texans. Congratulations. No consequences for running your organization into the ground. After the Texans were up 24-0 against Kansas City with a chance to potentially go to the Super Bowl, they would have hosted the AFC Championship game against Tannehill's Titans. up 24-0 against Kansas City. They had the worst record in the NFL over a 3-year span. They won 12 total games, and then they went out and won 11 this year. After winning 12 games in 3 years, they won 11 games. It's so stupid and so funny, but good on the Texans for pulling that out. And they were essentially this year's Jaguars, right? They go from having the number 2 pick in the draft to winning a crappy division, and by virtue of winning a crappy division, they got a playoff game against a 5 seed that they ended up winning a surprising victory, right? That's exactly what the Jaguars did last year, like tit for tat, exactly what the Jaguars did last year. So commend the Texans. They have work to do to maintain their position, especially because 3 teams in the AFC South had a winning record last year. So the AFC South might be mediocre, but they do have teams that are at least competent in that division. So it will be tough for them to maintain their crown, because I don't think either of the Texans, Jaguars, or Colts are going to do anything this offseason that like truly separates them from the pack of the group.
Well, what could separate for the Colts is we'll see, and this is still unknown. What does Anthony Richardson come back and look like? Because he looked interesting in those first couple games. He looked like he could be a problem for NFL defenses, just given his skill set and his abilities. But health is going to be one of the big things. Health permitting Anthony Richardson having a successful NFL career, because Shane Steichen, he showed some promise as the head coach of that team. So the Colts, they could be good moving forward. I know that the Jaguars are making some changes, in particular in the coaching staff, to try and fix things for Trevor Lawrence, fix things for this Jags team moving forward. But yeah, again, we're talking about the Bobby Slowik thing. It's just, it's a constant issue, and it does suck why defensive coordinators don't get more of an opportunity at head coaching job. But if you're going to draft a young quarterback, you just want that guy that's going to be with him for the early part of his career, instrumental in his development. And if they lose Bobby Slowik, that's going to be a heavy impact on C.J. Stroud, regardless of anything else, because you see it every time. Like we talk about these highly coveted prospects, 7 coordinators in 7 years, you end up like Marcus Mariota or Alex Smith. It impacts you. It's hard to get away from. You know who I want to also say something about too? I thought Nick Caserio was on his last legs there as the GM, but they made some great draft picks this year. And Tank Dell, it was unfortunate what happened to him with his, I think he broke his leg straight up. Unfortunate what happened to Tank Dell there. But if Tank Dell returns healthy, the building around, Nico Collins looked good too. They have a good wide receiving core that actually started to look like that could be a good 1-2 punch moving forward. Again, I mentioned Will Anderson. Derek Stingley was hurt during this point, but the funny part is I think the Texans this season could have been better. We forget that C.J. Stroud missed games this season because of the concussion, and hopefully that's not a reoccurring thing for him, because he missed several weeks for a concussion. That's kind of concerning relatively to other guys who have been in concussion protocol and come back that week. But the fact that he was able to come back, make the playoffs and everything like that. I feel like a little bit better, oddly, about this Texans playoff run than I did about last year's Jaguars playoff run. Like the Jaguars kind of like looked like they were just still kind of just figuring it out, just getting by, just getting like close victories and everything like this. This Texans team, they were kicking people's ass. I mean, look what they did to the Browns in the first round of the playoffs. Like they didn't mess around. They buried the Browns.
Even non-concussion territory for CJ Stroud, one of the other things that just makes their season look a little bit worse than it was they lost a game to the Jaguars where the game-tying kick hit the crossbar on a field goal that ended up losing them the game. Like if the ball bounces another direction, maybe they get a win against the Jaguars, and they didn't even have to like have a win or go home game the last week of the season against the Colts. Like it was a crazy, silly way for the Texans to win that division. And once again, AFC South, pyramid scheme as always. A decade's worth of work, pyramid scheming your way through the NFL and siphoning billions of dollars away from Disney and ESPN. You guys have done a great job pyramid scheming your way. They did it again this week. What was the most boring game of the divisional round weekend? It was Texans and Ravens. Once again, siphoning money away from Disney in their first ever playoff divisional round game.
Well,
just doing a great job of stealing money.
That will be the next question that the Texans have to answer, right? Is we accept that they were going to get blown out by the Baltimore Ravens. Like out of all the betting lines of the weekend, I think most people felt most confident in the Ravens -9, right? But But moving forward, can they be on those guys' tier? Can they get to the point of being at the Ravens level, at the Chiefs level, at the Bills level, with these other teams that were still in the playoffs? And you have the quarterback figured out. It seems like you have the right coach, because even though he may never be like the play caller for them, like on offense, DeMeco, I think he was calling plays for them defensively, so that's something that a lot of like these guys who get defensive guys to get head coaching positions don't do. Robert Saleh wasn't doing that when he got the head coaching position for the Jets, which I think is a big feather in his cap for DeMeco, but he's always just going to be a great high energy guy. He's always going to be a guy that guys want to play for. A true, as they say, leader of men. Like that's what DeMeco Ryans is. So like coach quarterback. All right. That's great. Again, I mentioned the young wide receivers, Nico and Tank. If he comes back healthy, that's great. They need to fix the running game. Now we talked about this before, but I think there's a big name free agent running back that's going to be available that I think the Texans should pursue, and Derrick Henry. If they add him, I think that's going to be very valuable. Of course, fix up the offensive line. You want to protect your guy. You want to make sure that C.J. Stroud is on both feet. Derek Stingley came back. He looked good. He looked good coming back off his injury. Hopefully he continues to build off of that. If they just keep adding to this defense, right? Just keep getting pieces, maybe a linebacker or two. So, I think that those are going to be some pieces, things that need to be addressed if the Texans want to level up. But I think that they have the right foundation. They have the right foundation to build a house on at this point.
And you mentioned DeMeco putting together the defensive game plans for this season, and I think that was a huge deal for why they were as good as they were, because this was the most overachieving defense in the NFL, and they were still about average. They finished 18th in DVOA at the end of the season. This wasn't an elite defensive unit. That the strength of the team was obviously built on their top of the line offense that had CJ Stroud and Nico and Tank Dell for a while. And by the way, what I think might be the most undervalued player in the NFL in two different places he's been, which is Dalton Schultz. Like Dalton Schultz is essentially Mark Andrews in my book. And the Cowboys walked in and said, we can replace Mark Andrews, and really didn't, because CeeDee Lamb had the highest percentage of any team's offense in the NFL this year. Add in the fact that Dalton Schultz had an incredible season at the tight end position for the Texans, and the defense, which you mentioned Will Anderson, you mentioned Derek Stingley. The rest of that defense was essentially just a bunch of dudes that were waived by other teams. I'm not even talking about like free agent signings on 1-year deals, just dudes that other teams said we don't want anymore. Derek Barnett was their other edge rusher this year, just got straight up waived by the Philadelphia Eagles earlier this year. Malik, Jackson from, he's been in a bunch of, Malik Collins, not Malik Jackson. Malik Jackson used to play for the Broncos. Malik Collins was someone who just got waived earlier this year. Did you know that they had Kareem Jackson on that team? The dude that got waived by the Broncos because he hit too many people in the head? Kareem Jackson was on this defense this year. They were just signing dudes that were rejects from everywhere else.
Jimmy
and we're
Ward,
still putting together a
still on that team, right? Jimmy Ward was one of their
Yep.
leaders.
Jimmy Ward, he was a reject from somewhere else. Jalen Petrie, he was a reject.
San Francisco, not reject. Jimmy Ward was a good player.
Denzel Perriman, he got waived halfway through last season. Come to the Texans. The Texans will take all of your rejects and put them into a defense. Now, granted, that's not a sustainable model for success, but DeMeco looked up and said, this was the worst defense in the NFL last season, and you know how we're going to fix it? We're going to trade our first-round pick for next year for an edge rusher, and we're just going to bring in new people. We bring in new people who know how to run this defense. We can put together a competent defense. And they achieved that for this year. But they would really, really like to have players that are not just everyone else's rejects for whatever reasons. Barnett getting waived by the Eagles, Jimmy Ward, again, Kareem Jackson, who, again, I forgot was on the Texans after the Broncos essentially cut him because he hit too many people in the head. Like, they just had everyone's rejects in there on that defense, and were just trying their very best to put it together and make it work. And they did. They were the most overachieving defense of this season by just being league average. And then when the playoffs rolled around, Steven Nelson, who, again, another Philadelphia reject, Steven Nelson had a pick six in a playoff game that ended up swinging the tides in their fortunes against Cleveland. So yeah, if DeMeco can do that with rejects from everywhere else, imagine what DeMeco can do with a defense that actually has second, third, and fourth round picks and some big money free agents that they maybe go out and sign. And I'm not just talking about like the 1 year stopgaps, like go out and sign some legitimate free agents, like maybe Kenny Moore over there with the Colts, or going out and signing some guys who are, finishing their fourth year on their rookie contract and maybe looking for a 3 or 4 year deal from somewhere else. Let's see what happens when they actually pour resources into that defense and see what DeMeco can do with them.
Yeah, yeah. If you're a Texas fan, I mean, you got to be excited. They definitely are setting themselves up well into the future. Again, going back to the Deshaun Watson deal, I mean, the fact that they have draft picks to work with too, because of that's something that can't be underrated as well. Leave a like on the video. Drop below your thoughts on this year's Texas team in the comment section. Subscribe to the channel. Follow us on all our social medias from Juju and Kyle. Stay safe, happy, and healthy. We'll see you next time.